Greetings, Corpse Clubbers, and welcome to another episode of Corpse Club, the official podcast for dailydead.com. My name is Heather Wixson, and for this week's episode, I am thrilled to be joined by Brendan Walsh, who directed the recent film that just came out this weekend, Centigrade, which taps into pretty much all of my worst fears. So I'm really excited to dig into this movie with you today, Brendan. So thank you so much for taking time.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So before we jump into this movie, I wanted to talk a little about your background because I was very fascinated by some of the projects you've worked on and a lot of the experiences you've had, particularly, and I know we're a horror podcast, but everybody who kind of knows me knows that I'm sort of a sucker for wrestling as well. But I saw that you worked on The Wrestler.
Yeah.
Which I love that movie. I think there's something really beautiful and really special about it. And I'm just curious, like, what was that experience like? Because you're working with some pretty big personalities on a film like that. Plus, what I think is really interesting too is you can't shoot that movie like a typical drama because of the action involved with it as well. So I was curious if you talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I was an assistant director on The Wrestler. You know, that's kind of my background where I kind of came out of or cut my teeth on to try to get into directing. It was a wild movie. I mean, it was one of those movies that was super hard. It was a small movie for what it wanted to be, but everybody was really great in the end. I mean, as far as the action, I mean, Darren was really great at kind of figuring out how to shoot everything. They had this great strategy of going into real wrestling matches and making deals with real wrestling. The producers and them, they made deals with real wrestling like venues and said like, okay, you guys put on a wrestling venue and we're going to come in with Mickey and we're going to wrestle just like right in the middle, you know? So like you have your crowd, you have everything else. We're going to plop in for, 10 minutes and we're going to shoot something. We would stay till the next day or shoot some, early before the fans and stuff would come in and we'd shoot all our kind of closer tight stuff. It was definitely a lesson for me in filmmaking and getting things done, not in a huge budget way, but kind of thinking outside the box. And it was such a great story. It was one of those films, like when I first read it, I was always a Darren Aronofsky fan. I mean, I even told Darren when we first met that I wrote a paper on Requiem for a Dream, my short stint in college. But, it was one of those films when you read it and I was like, this could be bad, but I'm sure, I think it's going to be really, really good. But if you do this wrong, it could be bad.
Yeah.
Like it could easily be really bad.
Yeah,
but
very
I was
true.
like, I'm pretty sure this is going to be awesome. And you knew it after the first couple days of it. You're like, oh yeah, this is going to be awesome.
Yeah, I still think about that final shot, and it still makes me choke up just thinking about it. So it's one of those. I remember seeing it on New Year's Eve in 2008. And it was like, it's New Year's Eve. You're supposed to go out and have fun. And I seriously left the theater like sobbing. And I was like, wow, what a way to end my year. But no, it was it's a beautiful film. And the way you guys were able to sort of capture the essence of what independent wrestling was at that time was really authentic. And I think that's what I appreciated the most about it, because I've been a wrestling nerd like ever since I was a little kid. So I always knew the big companies, but I also got to know the little companies as I got older and was more aware of, different promotions and things like that. And I just think there was a real nice authenticity. And also my biggest pet peeve whenever somebody comes into that world, they don't know how to shoot it right or shoot it properly. Yeah. And I think you guys really nailed it. So really I think you guys did a fantastic job.
That DP, Maurice Alberti, she's she's an amazing DP. I think just before that, I mean, this is so long ago, I'm trying to remember everything, but I think just before that, she had done a very good documentary, and that's where Darren had kind of seen her work. They just had such a great plan and such a good, they just made everything really sit with the actor, and kind of just everything was pretty much handheld, and following Mickey everywhere, or the Ram. And I too, I didn't know much about wrestling at all, but I learned a lot. And that authenticity that you talk about is because they went into the real spots. They drove down to Philadelphia and shot in Philadelphia for the kind of rough, I don't know what you call it. I forget what the term is. there's some sort of wrestling term for the kind of wrestling it was, but you know, they were like, there's a lot of glass and barbed wire.
Death match style, yeah.
Death match style, that's what it is. And I met the Necro Butcher, and he was amazing. He was a very sweet man called the Necro Butcher.
Yes.
We did karaoke at night. He's saying you got to know when to hold them, but during the day he stapled a $5 bill to his forehead. So I mean, it was definitely the authenticity was definitely there, because you know we went to those places, you know, asked to join. That put Mickey up against mostly real wrestlers.
Wow, that's amazing. I wish there was footage of Necro Butcher singing "You Got to Know When to Hold 'Em," because I would watch that. That is amazing. Well, I also know you've done a lot of television as well, and I'm curious, how different is that experience for you versus features, and how much did that help you because you're moving at such a different pace? Like, how does that help prepare you for taking on something like Centigrade? Because, you know, as we're going to get into, this is, even though it's a very contained movie, it's very ambitious in a lot of ways. And I'm guessing sort of being able to adapt to something like television and work in it as long as you did, like, really helped you sort of hone, you know, your ability to, you know, think quickly and adapt and all those kind of things, because you don't, you know, you have to move, you know, after you're done with, you know, one episode, like after 7 days, you got to jump right into the next one.
Yeah, of course. So, you know, the main difference is really where the director stands. You know, on TV, as a director, you know, you're there to serve the writer and the show as a whole. So you're usually there to serve what the showrunner needs and how it's going to kind of continue on, you know, for the many episodes past you. And in film, you know, you're kind of the end of everything. So it kind of is all serving your vision instead of serving someone else. So that's where the exciting part of film is. You're right, in TV, you have to be you have to be nimble. I mean, TV's come such a long way from what it used to be. I mean, now most TV shows are, you know, even bigger than movies that come out. That's just kind of the way our business has been going. I would say that when I went as a, you know, I hate bringing up my experience as an assistant director, but it is kind of something. When I worked underneath a lot of different directors, you know, Darren Aronofsky, Doug Lyman, Lasse Hallström, Ross Katz, like a lot of, you know, very different types of directors. And then on TV, I worked under even more. I mean, those were mostly movie guys. And then in TV, it was just tons of other people. And, you know, watching how people adapt and how people, you know, treat certain situation was an enormous tool for me to kind of fall back on. You know, it was my first feature, but I had done so much work and I had watched so much work that, you know, the answers didn't seem so foreign. You know, the what do we do next? How do we get around this? You know, I guess at this point, you know, had enough experience on the set to go, you know, this is going to turn out poorly if we keep going down this road, which tons of things turned out poorly on Centigrade. but most of it was things that you would never even realize, you know, how we shot it. You know, we were in a freezer for the movie, and it was just there was these little things that you would never think are going to be such a big deal, like removing the doors. You know, tape. Apparently, tape doesn't work in a freezer. And every crew person came up to him. They were like, "Half my job involves tape. How do I do this? I don't know." I was like, "That I don't know." I think I strayed off your question.
So let's jump into Centigrade. And for anybody listening, we are probably going to jump into some spoilers. So if you do plan to watch the movie, which I would highly recommend because I loved it, it does open this weekend. It's on VOD, basically every digital platform. And for those of you who are lucky enough to live near a drive-in, I know it's going to be playing at different drive-ins. So if you don't want anything spoiled, I would recommend coming back and listening to this afterwards. For those of you who don't mind, you know, go ahead and listen at your own pleasure. We talked about this really briefly before we started recording, but like for me, this taps into all of like my worst fears. The beauty of this movie, you know, you have two characters contained inside of a car, and you know, sometimes people do that as a means to quote unquote like control their budget, or is sort of a way of like sort of shorting, just trying to work around like things like that. And yet this movie never feels like it's contained for the wrong reasons, if that makes any kind of sense. It really works well. And I know that it's been said like this is based on some on true life events. And I think I read it was in the piece you did with Clark over at Entertainment Weekly. This is sort of an amalgam of a few different stories. And I was wondering if you could talk about that, because honestly, like I drive like up to Sundance every year, and I never leave without a blanket, an extra bottle, like an extra jug of water, and chocolate bars. And I'm just on a highway, a well-populated highway. And so this, seeing these two people immediately wake up and they're completely screwed, I was just like tense from moment one. And I don't think I like unclenched my fists until like the very end of the movie.
Well, that's great to hear. I always said that I just want people to kind of watch the movie like with their shoulders just a little bit up on their ears the whole time.
Oh yeah, that was me.
A little just like neck tense. There's a lot of that I could speak of to what you just said. So let's talk about the stories. So it's an amalgamation of many stories. Like the first story that sparked it, and there was the story came to me from the original writer, Daley Nixon, who I just, kind of did some tweaking with him, and we added some more stuff together, and I kind of co-wrote with him. But the first story is there was a man in Sweden, and he was found in his car after 2 months. Later, there's other stories. If you go on the internet, you start trying to Google into some of this, as I did in the beginning. There's questions on whether he did it on purpose or whatever. But he stayed there for 2 months. He drank energy drinks and nuts. And that's how he stayed alive. And his body, they said, went into a hibernation state, and he slept a lot. His car was so frosted over on the inside and just dirty. And, I think that's the first thing that sparked, the idea about somebody being stuck in their car. And then, as I started taking it over with Daley, there were so many stories that I started to look up and find. There was a couple in 1989 that actually became a very famous story. And it was a husband and wife, and they had a baby. Eventually, the husband went and trotted off to try to get help and was found. And he brought people back to the baby and wife. There's a very, it's probably not great to say, but I found it what looked like a very shoddy movie about it with Neil Patrick Harris. And it was like a made-for-TV movie about this couple. And then there was a story about a grandma who was found and she had to eat dog food for like 4 days. I mean, there were so many different stories. And we kind of pulled a nugget out of a lot of them. The main part of it inspired by the man who was found who stuck by himself. There was a woman who gave birth, and had to do that in her car with her husband, and I think lasted for 2 days, before being rescued. But in the whole, and as I was researching and doing more, and I'm going to go into spoilers already. Like the candle that's in there is like there was a DP friend of mine who's from Canada, and he read the story and he wanted to, he said like, in Canada, you're told to drive around with a candle in your car because if you get stuck, the candle will warm your car, will warm the space to keep you warm. And I was like, oh, that's a great idea. So it was really just like a lot of different stories that we had pieced together into this one. If that answers all of that question. I don't know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think what's great about this is the fact that, when you're watching the movie, it really puts you right in the center of what's happening, to Naomi and to Matt, because it's basically this discussion of like, do you stay in the safety of your car or do you go outside and brave the elements? And I think, for a lot of us, I think we all have different opinions as to what we would do. And I think that's what I love about like survival movies is because it really puts you right in the center of it and forces you to confront things that you wouldn't normally think about. And I admit, like at the beginning of the movie, I'm like, gosh, like I don't know what I would do. I mean, probably I would stay in the car, but I'm guessing at a certain point I'd probably be like, okay, it's time to venture out. And I like the fact that there's, you know, it goes back and forth with like, what is the right way? Like, how do you do this? You know, and I thought that was really smart. And I thought another thing that was really great was, you know, for as contained as this is and claustrophobic and sort of really, you know, you're inside the car with these two people, but there's like all these really great establishing shots that just the vastness around these characters to me was actually more terrifying because there's just nothing. And especially because now you're also in a strange country, you know, there's nothing around, and that makes it even more terrifying. And I just thought that was a really great way to sort of play with that duality of like making something so suffocating but also so big and vast. And that's not an easy thing to pull off.
Yeah, you know, there was definitely a lot of editing choices and going back and like, are we outside too much? Okay, we're not outside. Okay, we haven't been outside enough. We got to go outside one more time. We need something that, you know, it was a very hard movie to edit because of those things that would make it like, oh, now I'm getting too much of a break of being outside, or like it needs to feel more. When you're outside, it needs to just feel like there's nothing they can do. And that was the big play of like, you know, the outside is this kind of, you know, the nature as this like antagonist that's kind of always beating down on them and always grumbling in the sound. I wish, I know we're in these times of COVID and, you know, only people are going to be able to see it in a drive-in theater or at their home. I just, you know, the amount of great sound work that went into kind of making this feel, making like a wind grumble constantly kind of beat at you. You know, I hope people invest in sound systems in their home and really turn the volume up to get the full effect. But there was a lot of kind of artfulness that went into that. But and all that is basically, you know, it's the outside, it's the landscape, it's the snow, it's the wind ticking at you, and the whole stay or go thing. I mean, that's always been the big kind of question of who does what and why and where. And when you actually look up, like the survival experts say, if you get out and go, you're gonna pretty much not make it. Like you just, you know, like there's so much like, so a survival expert would say, you know, stay in the shelter, because the minute you get out and get wet and start trudging through, and you don't know how to survive the snow, you don't know how to like build, you know, snow caves to get out of the elements, that you die. And that was one of the things that I kind of loved about the movie, was that, you know, I've seen a lot of survival movies, and I've seen a lot of movies where it's, you know, the mountaineer who gets stuck, you know, the rock climber who's, you know, stuck and kind of, you know, has had to like, you know, has a little experience, or, you know, the astronaut lost in space. I mean, there's things where like you're kind of set in a setting or an element that you're a little more used to, but to just take a couple who's just kind of out there on their own and dump them in the middle of this kind of situation that can really happen to anybody. You know, the whole argument of like, we should have kept driving. You know, anybody would have agreed that we shouldn't have kept driving. We had to pull over. Like, you know, we've all, you know, I know I've been in that situation where like, really pull over and let the storm pass. And, you know, you fall asleep and you wake up and you're stuck. I mean, there's nothing you can do. So the fact that they just, you know, didn't have this underlying experience of how to deal with this element was interesting for me. I thought it all helped with the stay or go, because, you know, who knows who's right. And everybody we've had, you know, obviously a lot of people watch before we went out, and it was very polarizing. Some people would be like, I would stay, or I would kick them. I would just kick all the windows out and do all this. And like I would be like, and I kept talking to them. I was like, well, you can't actually kick a window out of a car. Like cars are kind of built in a way, like you can do this, and it you know, it changes, you know, from man to woman. You know, I've had women go, you know, he should have done this more. And then the guy's like, I would have just kicked the door out. I would have done this. You know, it's just fun to kind of watch people, you know, say what they would do and how they would have done it better. I look forward to, we're going to a drive-in theater and hoping I'm watching people on dates arguing about the movie.
Well, you know, obviously at the heart of this is Genesis and Vincent, because, you know, they, you know, basically if you don't have them, they don't really have conflict. You don't have the movie and the story here. And it's interesting because you mentioned you filmed in a freezer, which so many people would have just sort of like put a car somewhere in a parking lot, fake the snow, but you put them in these conditions, which adds a lot to this film. Because for the one thing that always kills me when I'm watching a movie like with cold weather, if there's no breath, I immediately see it and it bothers me.
Yeah.
So I love the breath. That was like, I was like, the detail part of my brain was like, okay, there it is. And can you talk about, because like, I mean, how do you get two actors to basically say, yeah, we're going to go sit in the car for, you know, you guys shot for like, I think, was it 24? Did you guys shoot for 24 days also?
We shot for 13 days in the car. And this, you know, goes back to me with, you know, I guess either my experience or my just like wanting to just do something weird, but also like pull off something that I think makes the movie so much better. When I did meet with Genesis and Vincent, you know, I was like, look, this is my idea. Like, you know, we could talk about it. I was, you know, I kind of tiptoed into it because you don't want to just be the guy who's like, I want you to get in the freezer and I want you not to eat and I want you to do this and, you know, yell at each other. I'd like to shoot 3 to 4 days a week. I like you to feel the hunger. I would like his facial hair to grow. We could see their bodies change. And they were kind of, you know, the freezer thing, they were just like, oh yeah, that's great. I don't have to act cold. I don't have to do this. I don't have to wear layers and be in the sun, you know. So they, you know, they kind of got on board pretty quickly. I mean, you know, we put 2 cars in an ice cream freezer. When we pushed these 2 Land Rovers inside there, and we created these plexiglass boxes to go outside the window, and we put snow in it. And I was like, it's going to be very important what's outside these windows because we were staring at these windows the whole time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it was crazy because, like, you know, as it starts off, like, okay, we hit day 4. I'm like, okay, this is bad, but okay, you know, we're day 4, and then all of a sudden it's like day 15, and I'm like, oh my god. And then we get like on, and then all of a sudden she's giving birth, and I was like, oh my god. Like, I was just one of those things where it's like, you know, when you think of like having to give birth, honestly, the birth scene for this movie is sort of really, I don't know if allegorical, but like, for me, like watching her have to go through this giving birth under these conditions, it felt heightened because of where we're at right now, because I can't imagine how women who are pregnant, who have to give birth amongst a pandemic must feel. And I mean, it's obviously not ideal because, like, you know, it's supposed to be a happy occasion. It's supposed to be, you know, a celebratory moment. And it's very tense and very nerve-wracking. And so I thought that was a really interesting reflection where I'm like, obviously you guys probably didn't plan it because you didn't know that this was all going to happen. But it was like watching that scene where we're at right now. And I was like, wow, you know, that it gave me a whole new appreciation for what anybody who's going through a pregnancy right now and has to contend with the idea of like having to give birth, you know, everybody has to wear face masks and nobody can touch anybody and everybody, you know, there can only be a certain amount of people around. I just thought that was like very, very effective. And I also want to tip my hat to the fact that you dealt with placenta, because there's so many times in a movie
nobody deals with placenta.
They never do. When you watch a movie and a woman gives birth and she's like, "Oh, I have my baby, haha, everything's happy," and that's it. And you're like, "But that's not the full birthing process."
And you know what? We actually cut an umbilical cord. We just took it out of the movie. I have 3 kids, so I was always like, well, you know, that was where it became in the writing process. So I was like, well, we got to do this, and then I was also like, well, they got to eat the placenta. That's what everybody does nowadays. Nowadays, you have a baby, everybody's like, are you going to eat the placenta? Or you could bury it underneath a tree. That was that was definitely a fun thing for us to do.
Yeah, that definitely got me squeamish, though. I was like, oh God.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned it, you know, the times we're in right now. My producing partner and best friend, who's the producer and the editor on the film, Bradley Ross, he just had a baby during COVID.
Oh, wow.
About 3 or 4 months ago. His wife, who's a friend, and who has seen the movie so many times, more than she would ever want to, because, he was the editor of the film. He goes, yeah, that birth was pretty spot on. That was exactly what it was like.
Again, it's one of those movies where like you look at the concept and on paper you're like, oh, this is so simple, but like there's a lot to put together for this movie to really pull it off. And I'm just curious from your perspective, looking at your experiences making this film, kind of learning as you go in terms of, how to deal with, things changing color and, trying to shoot inside a car and trying to, figure out that balance of inside versus outside and, dealing, with cast and everything like that. I'm curious, looking at all this, like what is sort of your biggest takeaway from your experiences working on this? Like, did you sort of discover things about yourself personally, professionally, or maybe it's sort of like a combination of both?
I mean, producer partner Brad I was talking about before, he'll say like, yeah, well, Brendan he takes something that couldn't be easy and he makes it harder. But you do go into something like this, or especially like when you get into the beginning stages of producers talking to you and saying like 2 people in a car, like how bad can it be? But it's super hard because you have to make that interesting. You can't it can't just be the same 2 shots in the car. I fought very hard to kind of not make it feel like the same moment. Like everything had to feel like you're in a different place of the car, and that runs out. You push yourself very hard to do it. I never in my, wildest dreams was like, what I really want to do? Shoot in a car and nothing else. I mean, but at the same time, it wasn't like I was drawn to the story because it was easy. I think I was drawn to the story because of what the story was. And I was drawn to do the film and to do it in the kind of the way that we did it, because although it made it challenging, it's kind of what makes it good. I kind of forget the question. You have to push yourself to always make it interesting or weird. I would sometimes be like, okay, let's do something weirder. How do we get but like you have to push yourself to kind of keep trying to do something different, especially if somebody says that this shouldn't be easy. Because if it's easy, I just don't think it's going to come out as good as it could be.
Yeah, well, I definitely think you guys nailed it with this project, and I'm excited to see people the reactions to this when it comes out, because I think it's going to open up some really interesting conversations about just exactly who would do what and how would you survive. Yeah.
I used to want to I don't know how old you are, but back in like the 90s, early 90s, there was a kind of trailer that you would do on movies where you would interview people outside the theater when they were on their dates, and they were like, I loved it. And I was like, this would be a perfect movie for that kind of gimmick.
you just watch couples come out of the movie theater and they're fighting with each other.
Yeah,
it's just like, you're the idiot that would get us killed. And
you always spill the water. I told you.
Absolutely, I love that idea. I wish we were in a place where we could have theaters again. But maybe they could get out to some of the drive-ins in Southern California and go up to people's cars and talk to them after the movie out here.
Oh, absolutely. I think we're pushing for Warwick in New York.
Yeah, there's a few drive-ins out here that have been really good to IFC Midnight lately. We have the Vineland drive-in, and then we also have the Mission Tiki. And I know right now they're playing The Rental, which is out through IFC. So I'm guessing you guys will probably slide into that screen once this comes out. But yeah, it's really fun. Like for me, like I grew up going to drive-ins. So I mean, obviously, I would love the quote-unquote authentic theatrical experience because I miss it. But at the same time, getting to see everybody sort of re-embrace the drive-in experience for me has been kind of cool.
It's great.
That's how I grew up watching a lot of movies. So it's been sort of fun to sort of see everybody kind of go, oh, there are other ways to watch movies.
Funny thing, I mean, we started this movie 2 years ago. When we were done shooting and we were in the middle of editing, I was like, you know what the best premiere of this movie would be? In a drive-in We're all in a drive-in movie theater. And then like 15 minutes into it, we get special effects guys to just make it snow like in the middle while you're watching. And everybody will just go like, fuck, this sucks. Like, in the winter.
I love it. That's sort of like a drive-in meets a William Castle experience.
Yeah.
Where he's like, I'm gonna make you cold while you're watching this.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, Brendan, thank you so much for taking time to chat today. And for those of you listening, again, Centigrade hits digital platforms, VOD, and drive-in theaters this weekend, beginning on August 28th. And again, it was a real pleasure to get to speak with you. Congratulations on everything you guys were able to achieve with this movie. It's very special, very effective. And like I said, I think I had like a fist, like tightly wound, like just so tightly closed for like I would say like 80% of this movie. And it was like, I actually had to take a breath, like take a break at one moment. I was like, okay, all right. You know, I think it was like day 20 and I was like, oh my God, I can't believe we're at day 20 now. So really you guys did a fantastic job and congratulations to everybody involved.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, it's so great to hear. I'm glad. I hope everybody else likes it. I'm sure there'll be a lot of, you know, mixed things that people would think they would do or want to do, or, you know, hopefully everybody keeps their marriage together.
Well, if nothing else, I mean, I think anything that sparks a conversation or sparks a response means you've done something right. So regardless how those conversations go, you should at least know that you've done something right.
Yeah.
For those of you guys listening at home, thank you so much for supporting Corpse Club. We really appreciate it. You can find out more information on us over at corpseclub.com. And for all your daily news, reviews, interviews, and things like that, please head over to dailydead.com and be sure to check out all of our coverage over there. And until next time, everybody, stay scary.